And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. It was just a few weeks ago that Governor Andrew Cuomo hosted the, quote, Open for Business Forum, and he announced a $400 million tax incentive that would give money to IBM and Intel and several other high-stakes financial firms. At the time, the governor said that the tax breaks would lead to more than $4 billion worth of economic development in this state. My next guests call those kinds of incentives corporate welfare. And today they were in the highest court in the land arguing that these are just not bad policy decisions, they are illegal. Jim Ostrowski is the attorney in the case of Bordelot versus the state of New York. We're also joined by Mr. Bordelot himself, Lee Bordelot. He is the lead plaintiff. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So how did it go?
Hard to predict a court, but we thought it went well. There were a number of skeptical questions of the state's attorney, and I think fewer when I stood up. So, you know, we're optimistic, but you can never predict what a court's going to do based on oral argument.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, I mean, if this goes in the way, it would be a significant watershed decision if this goes in the way that you would hope that it would. Because the state would be barred from giving away these sorts of incentives that the Cuomo administration and governors before him, many, say is necessary to build economic development in this state. You're from Western New York. Western New York needs a shot in the arm very badly.
Western New York needs lower taxes and less regulation. Giving money to politically favored businesses puts other politically non-favored businesses at a disadvantage. And the Constitution was written the way it was written for a reason, to make sure that this sort of thing didn't happen. And so in 1969, the state invented the Greater Development Association, or the UDC.
UDC.
And they were trying to do an end around the Constitution. It's never been challenged. Jim and I spoke 4 or 5 years ago about this, and we decided to challenge it.
And actually, a lower court said no the first time around.
Threw us out, and we appealed, and the appellate division reversed them 5-0 in our favor, but with a very glowing opinion on the issues.
Can you just recap that?
Well, there's 3 key issues in the case. One is there's a ban on gifts and grants. Can that be evaded because it's for economic development? The court said no. Can they launder the money through an authority? And the court said no. And then the last issue is, well, is there some sort of consideration here? IBM promises to create a seasonal landscaping job in exchange for $1 billion. Is that technically consideration that takes it out of being a gift? The court rejected the state's view that as a matter of law there was consideration. But there's a lot of open area on that, and we're hoping the Court of Appeals will actually explain a little more detail how they view that issue, because that may decide the whole case.
Okay, so Lee, do you imagine, assuming that this was found in your favor, do you imagine a system in which there are no incentives at all for economic development? Zero.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that.
And because your hope is that the money would be used for property tax relief, for example.
Property tax relief. You know, you lure companies here with a good business environment, less regulation, less taxes.
Okay, but that takes time, right? So what aren't you worried that in the interim, say that this is decided and it changes state policy dramatically, in the interim, while this money ostensibly goes for property tax relief and less regulation, et cetera, you've got a dead period where there aren't any jobs. There's like a massive exodus of jobs from New York.
There was a dead period before 1969. The fact is that states across the country have similar language in their constitutions and charters. And what I believe is if we win this case, other groups such as ours, and they're out there, and they've tried cases like this and lost, that maybe if we win this, that we've cracked the code. And so states will have to compete not with cash grants, not with any gifts, but compete on a competitive basis.
We're not just talking actually about economic development money that the governor controls. You're also talking about, this is best known by a shorthand as the pork lawsuit, right? Is that what actually spurred it all, was the legislative grants, if you will, that are given it out?
Yeah, really we were looking at Bass Pro for a number of years, and there was never a deal, so we couldn't sue. And then Lee called me up and said, what about the Hyatt? And I said, well, we may be able to go after it. And the Hyatt was getting money, I think, directly in the state budget, but they funnel it through the UDC. We call it money laundering, and the fellow who owns the Hyatt gives a lot of money to politicians, and that's the sort of political corruption angle, which was also of concern in the 19th century. So it's the same story, a different century. But our main concern is the cash grants, and we'd like that money funneled back to the taxpayer. For example, the gas tax, which really does hurt upstate New York, the tourist industry, the restaurant industry. In Buffalo, it's kind of a form of entertainment in the winter. And that would stimulate the economy immediately. So we believe that these policies have failed, and that lower taxes, as I explained to the court today, they said, well, what's the problem with New York? I said, well, our taxes are so much higher than Ohio and Pennsylvania, which are direct competitors, not China or North Carolina. We can't compete with Ohio and Pennsylvania because our cost of government is so much higher. That's what we have to deal with to stimulate the economy.
Are you, just curious, are you doing this pro bono? Is that how that's working?
No, I'm being paid a modest amount of money. People pooled their money together.
Because you're not alone in this, Lee. There are some other
I'm not
people.
alone.
Yeah, the 50 people pitched in, and we had a small fundraiser, and occasionally checks come in.
Because there's a possibility that if, in fact, you turn this policy on its ear, that you would go to other states and teach them sort of how to do this. Other people who wanted to challenge this policy of giving out incentives.
Well, we want to go after the IDAs next, but we're not going to do that until we win here. We're also going to go after the local governments because there's an analogous provision. If we win here, we'll pretty much be certain we'll defeat the local governments doing the same thing, because the language in the clauses are virtually identical.
And specifically, the language says no gifts. That's specifically what you're talking about here?
The absolute wording is the money of the state shall not be given to, loaned to, or in aid of any private corporation, organization, or undertaking.
Right.
And that pretty much precludes them from giving my money and your money and Jim's money to somebody else. And Milton Friedman coined the phrase, the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. And the few favored doesn't hold water.
But by that token, I mean, you're a libertarian, are you not? Or is it just
I guess you
from
could
a
call me
political
that.
ideology?
Yeah.
Oh, you too, Jim, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so but by that thought, you're talking about small government, itty-bitty government only, then you're saying, would that mean no social programs? No, all that you believe is...
No, the social programs are allowed under the Constitution.
Right.
This is not allowed under the plain language of the New York State Constitution.
So it's the pure giving of money, not the spending of money by government to benefit the citizens.
There's exceptions, and we're not contesting the exceptions as a matter of law. But there's no exception for business, and that was the original impetus, and that's where most of the money is. So that's where we're going after first.
In one of the briefs, the state briefs, said that the figure was $4.6 billion that we were interrupting. And that was 2 years ago. So, is it $6 billion today? Is that 3 or 4 or 5% of the state budget?
Well, and is that legislative and executive spending, or that's the state's figure?
Just their figure. I mean, I don't think anybody could actually do the math and come up with a number. The state controller's office has done studies on these grants and all the industrial development activities, and found that it really isn't effective. We don't care whether it's effective or not. What I'm concerned with was when I read the language of the Constitution, and I said to Jim, I said, that's pretty plain.
Certainly we have seen IDAs, for example, and there's been a lot of stories. I mean, former Assemblyman Brodsky, for example, has been going after them for some time, for corruption in the IDAs, plus the Empire Zones program. I mean, lots of reports about problems there. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, and before I let you go, I want to ask you, were you surprised that the state's highest court took this case?
No, there's so much money at stake, and as you say, so many important projects that inevitably they were going to get this case, and we actually consented to them getting it early because we want to know what their answer is.
Well, and it's going to be 1 to 2 months that we're expecting.
1 to 2 months, right? According to their published guidelines.
Okay, we really can't overstate what it would mean. It would be a dramatic shift in state policy if you win. So it's going to be
and positive
fascinating.
In our view.
Indeed.
For the economy.
Not in the state's view, but in your view, yes. So Jim Ostrowski, I want to thank you very much.
Thanks.
Lee Bordelove, thank you very much for being with us.
us.
I appreciate it.